The Power of Us. Powerful stories, important life lessons. We have exciting, exclusive on-camera interviews with AdSales Corporate Communications Coordinator and Walt Disney's very own Kristen T. Smith. DC-based web content manager and multimedia producer Calvin Michaels. Collegiate NABJ and Associated Press Award winner Kim Maria Wilson. Creator and founder of the University of Tennessee College of Law Black Alumni Association and University of Tennessee Juris Doctorate graduate Ryan J. McElhose. Human Resources Manager, Strategist, and Management Trainer Chantel M. Wilson. Howard Law graduate and New York City-based lawyer at Ropes and Gray, Patrick Smith. And Georgia Tech graduate, Harvard admitted, and Google product manager, Alexandra Foote. Brought to you by your podcast host, Karis K. Wilson. All available on the official Karis K. Wilson YouTube channel.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Bruins, but I'm known, I guess, on the internet as Calvin Michaels. I am someone who runs and operates an after-school program at a community center, but I also do music and I also podcast and do different things in the realms of entertainment and music.
Awesome. And then where did you go to school, graduate from, and then were you kind of, you can break, we'll get into this more in the interview, but can you talk about kind of like your work trajectory and where you are now?
Okay, so I went to Howard University and I graduated in 2010 with a degree in communications. Currently, my specific field of what I would like to do is I would like to branch a little bit further into the entertainment realm in regards to more so screenwriting, different things in regards to production and doing work behind the scenes, voiceovers, musical scores, different things like that. Currently right now, like I said, I've been running a community center, which has been a really great experience. In the long run, I'd like to get into a capacity where I pretty much run my own production company that centers in a bunch of various things in entertainment. And so I'm kind of at that cusp of making that shift.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, to go ahead and kind of jump into the questions. So can you talk about kind of life growing up and to your comfortability level, of course, life growing up, your experiences and how it impacted just your outlook on education and the pursuit of kind of your educational goals and career goals?
So I grew up in a military family where both of my parents served in the Army. So that was an experience where we moved around a lot. And I think because of that experience, I got an opportunity to live in different places around the world, both in Europe and in the United States. And so I think because I got to see so much, I always knew that there was more out there in addition to just what was in my hometown and what I was familiar with. So that kind of set up my outlook for what I wanted to do in regards to schooling. I knew I wanted to branch out and go somewhere different, which my parents were like, you want to go 3,000 miles away to where? And so that pretty much triggered the, I guess you can call the exodus from home, where I chose to go to Howard University all the way from Washington State. And I think when I got there were like 12 of us from Washington State. So it was a different experience, but I just wanted something different. I wanted to branch out. And again, because I had seen so much of the world, I just wanted to continue that experience of just seeing things that are different.
Sure. And can you talk about kind of why Howard? How did you decide that you wanted to go to one Howard into an HBCU versus like a PWI or predominantly white institution?
So because of where I grew up, I kind of grew up in that area where you're the only one in the group picture, or there's only so many of you in the class and you got just enough for the lunch table. And so I knew I just wanted to be around a different environment. And I always would go to Savannah, Georgia for the summers and visit my family. And so it was such a different planet from where I was from, because I was from Spanaway, Washington. And so a lot of times, the only time you saw a Black collective would be the barbershop or church. Other than that, you're the only one in the store. And so as far as HBCUs, I had a friend that said, hey, you want to come to me with this college fair? This was maybe my sophomore, junior year of high school. And it was an HBCU fair. I had never heard of an HBCU. The only thing remotely close to one I heard of was what I saw in Drumline. So I thought Atlanta A&T was a real school. But
I love it.
I want that. And so I went to the college fair, and of course the Howard table didn't have any pamphlets because everybody took them all. But I was like, well, clearly I want to go to that school because clearly everybody took all their stuff. So that must be the one. So at the time, Moorhouse and Howard, those were the two I was really gunning for. There were some other ones I looked at. I looked at Fisk. I looked at Knoxville College. There were a few others, but it was Howard and Moorhouse that stuck out to me.
Okay. I'm from Atlanta, and so why not Moorhouse? I see it's right next to my church that, I attend when I go home and stuff. Is down, like literally down the street, a few blocks. Why not Moorhouse?
So the deciding factor came down to money. And at the time, Howard was a bit more affordable because I really actually wanted to be in Atlanta because most of my family was in Georgia. I didn't know DC that well. I'd only been there one time and we just drove through it when I was like 8 or 9. So I was gunning towards Morehouse, but Howard was more affordable. And then at the same time, in the end, when I started thinking about the bigger picture, well, if I want to change my major or something, Howard is a larger school and has more programs. So let's just go ahead and do Howard, mainly because there's, you have options. There's a little bit more flexibility. I think I would have done fine at either institution. And really, I made my choice maybe about 2 months before it was time to leave because I was really stuck. I couldn't make up my mind. So I think I made a great choice, but I think at the same time, I would have been happy as well had I gone to Morehouse.
Okay. Makes I forgive you now. I was gonna say I forgive you. But no, that the one right. I've only been to Howard in that Washington area once, and it was when I was looking at graduate school and kind of trying to decide if I should do law or like PhD. So I understand what you mean by kind of like that one-off experience and not being completely sure because you want to kind of have your feet on the ground when you get there. So thank you for sharing that. So when you completed your survey to do this interview, one thing that you mentioned was that you don't regret, attending college and you value the experience. And so you are so artistically gifted. You have 50,000 plus followers on YouTube. You have a podcast that I went and checked out. I was like, oh my gosh, like it was something new was popping up. I was like, this man does everything. So why not just go and pursue these kind of different artistic ventures? You do music, you have an album, like you do everything. So talk a little bit about that and how navigating this journey has looked for you.
So in that experience, I knew I always wanted to go to college because like I said, I wanted something different, and it ended up being one of the best experiences I've ever had. I always talk to some long-term friends about this all the time. Like, man, we had it so good in undergrad. Remember, you remember those days. And so I'm not going to lie, while in undergrad, there were moments where I was like, man, should I really be here? Because I could really just hop on a plane and go to LA and do this and do that. But I've always wanted to do other things as well. One of the main decisions, or one of the main things that kind of jumped into why I chose the major I chose at the time, because when I came into Howard, I came in as a political science major, and then I shifted to communications. But Hurricane Katrina had just happened, and it did not sit well in my spirit to see so many people sitting on their roofs. And I remember I was in high school, it was the history class, and Hurricane Katrina had happened the week before school started, so it was still a conversation. And again, listening to the commentary of my classmates, it made you want to like throw hands with everybody. Why didn't out fast enough? And this would be a better chance for them, because I remember they were kind of relocating families or helping to place families in different locations. And so some families actually came to Washington State, to Fort Lewis, or it's now Joint Base Lewis McChord. And so some of the students were like, oh, well, this would be better for them because they never had anything before. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go into politics. I'm going to go to DC. I'm going to be a senator. So I always had the arts side, but I always have been very heavy into conversations around community and other things like that. So I've always been at this crossroads of wanting to do both at the same time. I feel if I solely only wanted to do the music and everything else, then I would have definitely maybe considered other options. But again, Howard has an amazing fine arts program, so maybe I would have just had a different major. So
sure. No, that makes total sense. And so
COVID-19 has changed our world and transformed the way we learn, regardless of our age or educational level. Now more than ever, we have access to online education and content. That's why you'll want to partner with me, voiceover artist Kim Wilson, for your business training modules, academic institutional e-learning programs, or your at-home e-learning online educational needs. I have a wide-ranging voice which is natural, warm, and soothing, but also rich and commanding. I've had the privilege of working with over 30 companies, including Children Inc., Learning Grove, the Salvation Army, the American Bible Society, Service Employees International Union, SEIU, V-Living, the Minority Business Development Agency, and Cox Automotive, just to name a few. If you have an educationally based project, whether it's voicing online work modules, educational training software, large live events, or educational seminars requiring voiceover, I am here to help meet your specific needs. Whether you represent a nonprofit or a for-profit organization, whether you're in K through 12 or college, undergraduate or graduate studies, I am the perfect fit for your voiceover needs. If you are an individual or a business seeking to hire for one project or multiple projects, feel free to give me a call at 404-981-1748 or send a business inquiry to kimwilsonthevoice@outlook.com. Again, that's 404-981-1748 or kimwilsonthevoice@outlook.com.
We're going to kind of transition a little bit. You do commentary. I don't know, maybe you should share kind of what you do, what your YouTube channel is, and then I'll ask the question. So can you kind of share what it is you do on your YouTube channel?
All right, so I pretty much just cover whatever's on my mind at the time. So that sometimes we have conversations around entertainment, music, politics, culture, lots of conversation around Black politics and Black life, current world events. So we kind of dive into a little bit of everything, just depending on where it is I am at the moment. And then I also use it to kind of promote my other projects, whether it's the music or the podcast or anything else that I'm working on.
Okay. I feel like your commentary and just you kind of being a voice for maybe those who don't have a platform or even the voiceless is something that people really admire and appreciate that you bring, at least that from what I can tell when I'm watching your lives or your previously recorded or just like in the comments. So you recently did a video where you provided commentary on not grouping everybody kind of as one and not calling people just people of color if you're, something other than white. So yeah, and you kind of talked about different objections you had to that. You said you think creates this kind of collective where it's white people and then it's everyone else. Can you talk about why you think that's problematic?
Yeah, and so the issue I've always had with that is what happens is you dilute everyone else's experience. And what happens is the standard ends up becoming measured against the idea of whiteness. And so there's a conversation of whiteness or the white collective within the United States or globally, and then there's everybody else, and we're all put into one bucket. And the issue is all of these different groups and communities are fighting for something different. And when you have so many groups represented in one pot who all have different beliefs, different viewpoints, different values, and sometimes every group doesn't even get along, but we're put under that same bucket, it's really hard to get the things that you're fighting for tangibly. Because again, it's kind of like, we'll put everybody in that bucket and that's the people of color bucket. And so what ends up happening is things get diluted, promises and grants and programs and bills that are specifically written for certain groups get kind of intertwined with a larger picture. And before you know it, people have been fighting for something much larger and they end up getting crumbs. I just was recently looking at what's happening with the conversation around Black farmers in the United States and how the Biden administration was looking to provide, pretty much, I don't know if I want to call it reparations, but we could say relief to farmers who have really just been gutted in relation to Black farmers. And it's a conversation around the fact that in the past, they weren't eligible to be USDA farms. A lot of them came from heirs land, and with heirs land at the specific point in time, you weren't allowed to operate different businesses. And then when we talk about corporations, they tend to purchase their, produce from USDA farms. And so you saw the demise of Black farmers for decades and decades and decades. So now there was a bill written to provide billions in relief and pretty much restitution for Black farmers. But in that same bill, they're going to include a bunch of other groups as well. And I'm not against other groups getting what's theirs, but if you line item something specifically for Black farmers, that's theirs. You're going to have to make a line item for the next group, give everybody rightfully so what's theirs. But when you do a people of color box, everybody, it's the big bucket and you give some sprinkles and all right, we covered it, we're good. So I just think, I think we have to dig deeper. People of color, I think is kind of a cop-out. That it's a way where you can kind of just appease everybody quickly and keep it moving to what's next without really addressing the issues that each group has.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you think, I know you gave the examples of the farmers, which I think is an excellent example. Can you talk about maybe in regards to education, how you think this maybe has presented issues or might present issues in the future?
Yes, look at the demographics of University of Maryland Eastern Shore campus, which is an HBCU, but at this point is no longer a majority Black institution. And it's not saying that other students aren't allowed to go to a certain school, but what's happening even in the conversation of HBCUs, a lot of them are getting the threats where if you don't diversify or be more inclusive, you're not going to get the same funding. So now you're seeing HBCUs even sometimes prioritize students who are not Black in order to make sure that they're getting their financial support from larger corporations or different state and local governments, or sometimes the federal government, depending on the institution. And so when you're talking about HBCUs, I love the fact that people would like to go and attend one, because I think it gives people an opportunity to see the world through a different lens in relation to what they were taught in K through 12. But at the same time, I think when the focus starts to become, let's include everybody in this outlook and in this program, or let's include everybody in this, what it is we offer. Now you're looking at scholarship money going to different groups of people. You're looking at grants and fellowships going to different groups of people, when in reality, the population that it was aimed to serve is now kind of the backseat. And it's not saying, again, that other groups should not get anything, but it shouldn't be at the expense of somebody else.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think I was recently, literally last night, I had a paper due at midnight, and I was writing a potential research project about the dangers of kind of grouping, saying, it's minorities, and, like you said, it's minorities, and then it's, white. So I think I definitely think that they're going to have to address what that looks like in the future. And I don't think any group feels too good about, like you said, just being kind of grouped and lumped into one, because like they're also different beliefs, values, issues. So yes, I definitely see where you're coming from on that. So transitioning a little bit, so in your survey that you completed again for this interview, there was a question kind of about the kind of new phase and trend of people kind of canceling college, or saying, it's not needed anymore, or it's, big waste of money, especially if you have to take out loans. And a lot of times you hear people, especially I feel like in the Black community, I don't know, you let me know what you think on this topic, use Mark Zuckerberg, and Steve Jobs as kind of this standard for, they went to, these colleges, these prestigious universities, and they dropped out in a few years, and look at, they're some of the richest people in the world. What would you say about that? I'm here to listen.
It's funny, we always latch onto the exceptions to the rule to highlight what the standard is supposed to be. And so if you're going to use Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg, they have not had, Steve Jobs, came from money. All right, his parents were doctors. And so he came from a whole bunch of backing and wealth. And then even with somebody like Zuckerberg, again, his mother was a psychiatrist. So these are two individuals that already came from wealth. And because of that, they had what you call that cushion they could fall on. So yes, they had the luxury of being able to say, I don't want to do school, but because, or they had the luxury to say, I don't want to do school anymore, but they also had backing, and they had cushion that could invest into what it is that they want to do. Within our community, sadly, because of the conversation around the wealth gap, a lot of us are not in a capacity where we have money to just blow, or we have money to really invest in our dreams or in our projects. And so if you're going to make the conversation about why you don't need school, I always support the idea of actually having a tangible plan. And I've always said it doesn't always have to be a 4-year. Maybe it's vocational school, maybe it's community college, maybe it's some kind of education. But in this country, you're going to need something on paper that pretty much can let you get in the door. Because for us, the door's already closed. We got to pry it open. But I got my degree, get in the room just for the interview. Yeah. But and I think the other thing is it's almost like, on the flip side, when people kind of have the conversation around race and they try to say why racism isn't a thing, and they will use LeBron James and Beyonce as why the rest of y'all need to get, step up. And it's like, okay, so the standard I have to measure myself against is one of the best athletes in the world, or one of the best entertainers in the world. And so, and that's not the standard other people collectively have to do in this country, specifically in white America. Their standard is not measured up against Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. But for us, again, it's that conversation of measuring up against the exception. I believe that, school is not for everybody. However, you definitely have to have some kind of tangible plan. And in this country, you pretty much need money to make money. So when people latch onto the ideas of these super billionaires and what they had and what they did, these are exceptions to the rules. That's why we constantly reference the same 20 or 30 people every single time. That's why you're always going to hear Steve Jobs or Zuckerberg, because there are a handful of the people, or Elon Musk, there are a handful of the people who were able to see through whatever, experience they had, but they also had backing. Or even when you look at Bill Gates with Microsoft, the parents helped to fund the initial, startup of the company. And so those are the things. I think if you're going to measure yourself up against somebody, it has to be measured against people that really share your same experience, because I think it takes you to a more realistic approach at what's next. If that's the case, there'd be a whole lot more billionaires.
Right. No, that makes total sense. And I from anecdotal experience, I think, and I want to get your thoughts on this, when thinking about Black men and approaching the kind of academic a traditional 4-year institution, there's a lot of, I don't want to change myself and talk in this way and perform this way and be performative and, code switch. I mean, how do you manage that? Is that something, if you've dealt with it, I want to hear what kind of your thoughts are. Now, even if you haven't, what would you suggest students do, or, Black men do, or Black males do, to manage through that process, to be true to themselves, but also navigate this space?
I'm in a space where I'm like, don't even worry about code switching. Don't do it. I'm really in a space where it's be unapologetically yourself. If you are very, assertive in everything that it is that you do and confident, you have the skills and the talent, you shouldn't have to paint yourself to be somebody else in order to get into a certain space. If that's the case, that space isn't for you. But I will say, I think to the fault of those before us, it was kind of something we were all taught where, in order to get into a certain room, you need to pronounce those E's and R's with precision. There's going to be a certain way to carry yourself. Even HBCUs, there were some in the past where there were no locks allowed, there were no braids allowed. There were certain things because at that point in time, we were being trained to assimilate and fall into a space where we could make other people comfortable. And I think as time has progressed, it's shown that even if you play the best of roles and do everything and dot the I's and cross the T's, you're still going to end up in a space of anti-Blackness, and you're still going to have to figure out how to matriculate through it. So I'm at a space where it's like, you know what? Be your authentic self. People tend to appreciate authenticity anyway. Mm-hmm. And so, even when you talk about some of the people who are, I always say Black spaces and high spaces, especially in media, you see a lot of the people who have been able to climb, they don't have that same connection collectively with a lot of Black people, because you can just tell that many times they've had to kind of sell themselves out or turn into somebody they're not to appease everybody. And at the end of the day, no matter how much you play that role, you're still going to be in the Black box, no matter what you have or who you marry or how you choose to pronounce your accents or pronounce your words and everything like that. The world is still going to be the world. So in regards to that, I don't think that's the conversation about college. College, for one, I think has a bunch of experiences. It's pretty much, yes, there's the career endeavors, but it's also a time and a space to discover who you are, to find yourself. If you are somebody who goes into college right after high school, let's be honest, you don't know who you are at 18, you were 17 or 19, you don't know at 26 and 27, but college gives you an opportunity to make those mistakes. And at the same time, you're doing it with other people who are on the same journey with you. So you all learn together. I think that's why so many people make their lifelong friends in undergrad, because those people that you struggle together with, y'all in the room crying because y'all both think you're about to fail, Right. So that's that experience. So I think with school, there's so many options. It's all about figuring out what's for you.
Okay. So would you say that there a delineation or a line should be drawn between professional? Because I think for Black people, it is kind of difficult to figure out, okay, I don't want to operate like, with Eurocentric view of what professionalism means, but also there has to be a standard. What does that mean? What does that look like, do you think, for people? Do people make up what that looks like? Can you just do whatever? Can you provide more context to that?
So I think we have always, as a collective, already had our own standards to begin with. I think of, and here's a perfect example. I think of, you have some people who will not support a Black business. They'll have one bad experience and say, I'll never do it again. Nope, that's why I don't do it. So within our collective, when you're talking professionalism or when you're talking just what it is that we expect of ourselves, when you go and you look at the history of a lot of Black establishments, whether it's something like a Gum Springs area in Northern Virginia, or even Tulsa before, it got burned down and everything like that, Black people already had their own and had their standard of how they did things. They had their own barber shops and stores and grocery stores and malls and banks and libraries, and it was a standard of how they operated. I think the problem is the definition of professionalism has been interchangeable with the idea of whiteness. And so that's what I think people fight against, because the idea of professionalism at the moment and how it's taught to many people is you have to aspire to be what the white collective is and what they're doing. That's how you have to do things. That's how you have to look. And I think that's kind of that internal conflict that people fight against. So I've always said you can be your authentic self, but there's always a conversation about how you present yourself or how you, how it is you want to be perceived by everybody else. So again, if you're somebody who's assertive, you know what you're doing and you do what you do well, and you're also likable, then I don't think you have to worry too much about the conversation of professionalism. I've been pretty much my authentic self in my field of work for years, and it's never really been something that's worked against me. And I think, if anything, it helped to open more doors, because I think people saw, okay, we're not going to be able to get over on this guy. We're going to have to, he's a little different. We're going to have to really be careful with how we interact, because he's not having it. So, I think that's kind of the experience.
Yeah. And I think I love what you just said there in that closing remark, just because I think sometimes people do think all Black faces in high places have, bowed to the status quo. And I mean, like I said, things can appear sometimes can appear differently than what it actually is. But like you said, you don't always know how people are acting in their spaces. It might seem one way to you, and some people are just, quiet. You don't say nothing to them, and like you said, you have to check a person or, let them know, this is Calvin or this is Karis, and like, this is what it is. So I really appreciate you saying that that just because you see Calvin and he's professional and he goes and he has his corporate job, or, you work where you work, it doesn't mean that you have to change yourself completely or you have to lose your identity. So when thinking about the application process, undergrad or graduate, we know that the SAT, GMAT, GRE, all those tests have commonly been, discussed as being racially unfair. It doesn't necessarily reflect maybe the person's intellect. So just kind of when thinking about potentially all of the different backgrounds that Black men might come from, whether it's, a middle income family, a less financially advantaged situation, how did you navigate the application process? How would you recommend those individuals in those spaces navigate the application process? Black men or Black women,
Yeah. Standardized testing, my goodness. I actually did a video on the origins of it and why I'm not a fan. But with the application process, for me, I mean, I had a pretty smooth process. I'm not even gonna lie. It was because I was so hungry to get out of where I was from. And so I didn't really run into too many issues. I did fairly decent on the SAT and everything like that. But I will say, in the field that I work in, I have a lot of students who have just amazing grades, and they're in all of these different clubs, and they're these just top-notch students. And then the test scores come back, and it's like, man, okay, we're gonna figure this one out. Okay, well, but I think more so that's a reflection of the curriculums and the way that the school systems are set up. But I've always felt that standardized testing, or whether it's SAT or ACT, it's tailored for a certain demographic of people, and that goes back to the origins of when college was more so for elite groups of people. It wasn't supposed to be for everybody else. And I think as that shifted, we never approached or reshifted or restructured the approach with applications in regards to standardized testing. I love that in the last year or two, especially after COVID, a lot of schools are not using it at the moment, which I think is a great idea. But in regards to Black students who are applying, I definitely think, the best option is make sure you have somebody who's helping you with that application, who's already been through the ropes. Who can tell you, the best practices and what works and what doesn't, and also what to include in your application. Standardized testing or the scores, that's really not even everything, because honestly, if you're just a perfect straight A student and you have a great SAT score, even then the universities are like, that's cool, but we're bored. Okay, what are you going to do to the people that can say, this is our noble alumni? We want the ones who are going to do something different, because think about every university. You have students that get in there who have a 1.1 or 1.9. Why? Because something in that application told that university there's something else that is special about them. And so I try not to harp too much on just
or because of the college cheating scandal. No, just joking.
Oh yeah. Mom paid $500. But there's something that makes you stand out. So it's all about giving an entire package. I always say that college application is, how like the TV show The Voice, I think, is a perfect example. They go on there, they audition, nobody can see or they can't see anything, they can only hear what you bring to the table. And if it's good enough, they push the little button and they turn around. That's the same approach you want to have to your college application. It needs to be jam-packed with all of the great things that you've done, even if it's not in academics, if it's something you do in the neighborhood. If you're the person in the neighborhood that does everybody's hair and you got 40 clients coming in every week, you find a way to put it in that application. I was a young business owner and I went into cosmetics, and just anything, you're going to have to do something that sells yourself to make you stand out from the other 40,000 applicants. So.
Yeah. So someone that's never done it before, that doesn't have mentors, that doesn't know where to go, do you feel like it's just kind of, I feel like I kind of know where you're going to go with this, but just based off knowing, some of your views on certain things, but are they supposed to just be driven and do it? How do you navigate that? Because I know, like you did commentary that a long time ago that I recently watched about Steve Harvey and him saying, I did not see, I watched that last Saturday. I was like, oh my goodness, about, they're up at, it's 9 o'clock on the, so I think you're very much, you very much speak to, it's not just about hard work, but because you also talked about something in that I agree with, which was that you do have to be prepared. Preparation meets opportunity. So you need to be playing with your resume, getting familiar with stuff. You have to be a bit, willing to curious, I think is the word I'm looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. You always want to be in a space where in the moment where you run into the right opportunity, you're prepared. So even with the conversation around applications, okay, if you don't have the luxury of having support, because for me, nobody in my family had gone to college, at least my immediate family. So I was kind of on an island by myself, but I had already went and kind of done the research. I was all on the internet. What do you do? What do you do here? And then again, and in this modern day of information, you can literally sit on YouTube and there's people on there explaining the best practices with how to apply. So it's all about utilizing the resources that are there. And again, you can always go in and find some random person that's going to school. What was your process like? But I do agree with the idea of you always want to be prepared to be in the right space at the right time. A lot of the people who really get on, this is why when people do the conversation about hard work and bootstraps and everything, I'm like, no, even in that conversation, a lot of them were just at the right place at the right time. So if you end up in that space, what are you going to do for yourself? Let's say you do the application, they call you in for the interview. Are you in a space where you can sell yourself now? They loved what you had on paper, or maybe they weren't sure and they want to see how you're going to be when it comes to the interview. How are you able to sell yourself? If they ask you a question about, what it is that you can contribute, or why should we choose you if it's between you and one other person who has this rack of accolades, how do you sell yourself? And so it's being in that space, confident enough to sell yourself, confident enough to understand your worth and what it is that you contribute. And again, I really think when it comes to applications, because they can be very intimidating, especially when you get to the graduate level. I'm like, my God, I don't know if I should do this anymore. That imposter syndrome kicks in.
Right.
So being confident and being able to sell yourself and highlight everything you've done, even if it's something minuscule in your mind, it's great to somebody else. Sometimes we doubt ourselves, or we sell ourselves short, because sometimes if you've grown up in a space with a lot of criticism, it's hard to see the good in what it is that you do. So yeah. I think, again, you just have to really utilize the resources that are there. And if you can't find any, you create your own, or you make it work. We've always been a collective that can make things work out of any kind of situation. So you'll have to have that same approach, because if you're struggling just with the application, wait till you get to the school. It's another ball game.
Yeah. You gotta dig deep. And I think too, particularly if you are a Black person, it's not the same. You have, the microaggressions, you have, questionable grades and treatment. I'm not trying to suggest anything, about any of my degree granting institutions, but I just feel like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be discussed and debated about the practices and the ways in which things are done, and who's reading your paper and their understanding and interpretation of your work. Like that's a whole nother conversation. But two more questions before we switch gears. So you mentioned imposter syndrome, and just so people know what that is, because I think it's important that people understand it's a real thing and how to don't let that. Can you talk about what is imposter syndrome, and then I'll ask you the next question after that.
So for me, imposter syndrome is pretty much when you may have a certain skill or something that you do very well, but you don't feel that you're worthy enough to do it, or you don't feel that you're qualified, or you don't feel that you're good enough, and you doubt yourself. And so, even in the world of athletes, you could be the fastest runner in the world, but you might be on that track, and right before it's time for the gun to go off, you're like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. That's kind of that same experience where sometimes you don't feel worthy enough to be in certain spaces, or if you've had a really great opportunity and you're afraid of it. Or even when people apply for jobs, sometimes people are afraid when they ask, what's your desired salary? You've been doing $80,000 or $90,000 work and you're afraid to ask for it. Well, I'll take 45 just to kind of ease in and climb up. Or even if you don't think you're qualified for that position because the list of job duties sounds like a foreign language to you, even though you've done it all. So that's pretty much imposter syndrome, feeling like, you doubt yourself, when in reality, half the time you can do everything that's expected and then some.
Yeah. It's a big deal. And I think now more than ever, especially since things are becoming so competitive, and it's just, it feels like, they're saying in high school now, what it takes to compete to get an undergrad is crazy. It's not the same as it's been in the previous years. So thinking about Black men in college spaces, although I know every single Black man, of course, their experience is not the same. Every single Black child, man or woman, is not the same. But what would you say for Black men specifically are some common experiences or challenges that you might encounter in college, and how would you navigate through those challenges?
All right, I think there's two perspectives. So if it's at a predominantly white institution, a lot of time, depending on where you go, because I've always, even with the kids that I work with, I always tell them when you're looking at colleges, in addition to the school, there's things you want to consider, like, are you going to be in a city or are you going to be in a college town? And if you're in a college town, what kind of state is it in? Or what area is it in? Is the college going to be the only thing? Where you getting your hair cut? Because it's not going to be super cuts, stuff like that. So in regards to being at a predominantly white institution, depending on the levels of diversity that exist, you're going to have to be prepared to be in a space where you will start to really see how highlighted anti-Blackness is. You'll see a lot of times where people kind of sometimes undervalue what it is that you believe in. And also because you're there, sometimes there's an expectation that you're supposed to be the top notch at everything because you're in this space. It's one of the things I remember experiencing, not in undergrad because I didn't go to a predominantly white institution, but at least in high school, it always felt that, you have all eyes on you at all the time. So I think the goal is to, one, still discover who you are, but find comfort in people who share your same experience. You're going to need that kind of support system, that kind of brotherhood, even if it's only with you and one other person, just because it's tough to pretty much be in a space where you're with 20 or 30 or 40,000 people who are from all over the world, different experiences, different socioeconomic bubbles, everything else like that. And so it can be intimidating. It can be something that's frustrating. Sometimes the classes, they don't click sometimes with the subject matter. Things may not relate to you. Conversations around cultural establishments, cultural practices at the university. Sometimes you'll see things that you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't quite sound right. Or even you'll hear certain comments. Or if you're at a school that's really not diverse and it's really just the athletes are the only ones that are there, you're almost there in a position of servitude where people love you as long as you're winning. And as soon as y'all mess up the game, then all of a sudden, different kind of conversation. So I think in that experience, you have to definitely build a support team to push through those 4 years. Now, that's not everybody's experience. Some people go in and it's a great time and it's fun and you want to do it forever. But I think you definitely have to be in a space where you have some kind of element of familiarity with somebody, because it's very hard to go in a space where you feel like you're the only one. In the conversation of HBCUs, I think a lot of times, one of the reasons why I pushed for it was because, at least in my high school, I felt like I was the only one. It was like me and 4 other people. And so going to an HBCU, for me, it actually humbled me a lot, because when I got there, I was like, oh, I'm student body president and I had a 4.0. And then everybody else was like, yeah, me too. So what's up? You're like, oh, okay. So it makes you have to challenge yourself, like, okay, I'm gonna have to do a little bit more. Long story short, like, I remember, quick story, I used to do a lot of dance too. So I was like really good back home and doing all these different competitions and stuff. So I got to Howard and thought I was going to be just like, you got served. And the first audition, next, huh? What? Like, my feelings were hurt. And so, things like that, it helps you to kind of push yourself and understand that, hey, yeah, you may be the cream of the crop in your hometown, but you and everybody else when you get to this space. So what are you going to do to get even into a better space, to become even a better version of you?
You talked about on your YouTube channel, you talked about, and you did some commentary on the young man who had to cut off his dreads to perform in his wrestling match. And I really was in awe of your commentary on that, because I thought you laid out beautifully. And I like that you hit in that commentary. People were like cheering on like this was a good thing. And his teammates, and his coaches, and whether they meant harm by that or not, I don't think they, intentionally meant harm. Like, yeah, cut off something, like you said, that's taken you years to grow out. That's a cultural symbol. I mean, that was so dehumanizing. And so, again, I think that seeing that type of, imagery reinforces to Black people, Black men, you have to do away with yourself, your identity, to exist in these white spaces. And not only do you have to do that, people will support it and, cheer you on so long as you do those things and encourage that. So, what would you say, again, when you have these kind of reinforcements of these ways that you are expected to exist and be?
Yeah, and it's such a challenge. And I think two of the things that made me so mad watching that was, one, even while they were cutting the hair, she was cutting it as fast as she could because she had to get there, before the clock ran out. So it's like, even when, I won't say selling yourself out, but even when assimilating into what's expected just so you can keep somebody else happy, even in the way that they get you into that lane, there's not even an effort for like care or quality. It's like, just hurry up and get it done. And the other thing was, like, even in the audience, there wasn't a single person that said anything. Like, everybody was cheering it on and thought it was fine. I'm like, man. And you will run into that. And that's why I say, like, you have to put your foot down, to be honest. There's just sometimes I've learned that every space isn't for us. And I don't want to be in every space sometimes. I saw there was an article where it was talking about some Black students who were fighting at one of the majority institutions because something about wanting to get into one of the Greek organizations because the university didn't have any of the Divine Nine. And so it was the white fraternities. And so, they're fighting and clawing to get into those. And I was like, man, is that really the space you want to be in? I understand the importance in regards to networking and brotherhood or sisterhood, but if they already don't want you there, why are you fighting to get into that space? That's not for you. So why don't y'all get together and do your own thing? That's pretty much how most of the Divine Nine started anyway. So, I think in regards to that, like recognizing that you're going to run into times and spaces where you're going to be challenged. And a lot of times people just want to see how you're going to respond if you're going to buy into it. And if you buy into it, they're like, okay, cool, business as usual. We can keep doing this. And I think there has to be more of us who are going to be like, no, absolutely not. And not only that, not only are we going to say no, but now we're going to make this a bigger issue. And now we're going up top to the next person. And we're going to make sure everybody knows what's happening over here. Because the other thing is, there's kind of like that code of silence where I think as a Black person, sometimes you're afraid to shake the table in certain spaces because there's not enough of you represented. And you already know how repercussions work. Recognize that in every space, I just don't think we have to fight the cloud to be in every space. Some of them, I don't want to say are not for us, but there's no value for us. And there's not anything that will contribute to our experience later down the line. So some spaces, let them have it. In regards to that wrestling video, I always felt what should have happened was he should have pretty much said no and then took it to a larger platform and highlighted the issue. Because in the end, the school would have looked bad.
And I did want to say his name. His name is Andrew Johnson. I just wanted to. I couldn't find his name on my papers, but I just want to say, his name is Andrew Johnson. So,
but in that moment, because he's so young and he hasn't quite lived yet, he's not even in a space with any of that has connected yet. So I don't even fault him because that's a lot of pressure. And you got the whole team. You come on, man, do it for the team. You're so brave. I every time I see that, I'm like, man. If I would have been in the audience, even if everybody there would have fought me, I would have had it back.
Right, don't do that. And this is wrong. Yeah.
And that one hurt to watch.
Yeah. So sacrifices. I think I would hope that we're all aware that you do have to make sacrifice for anything in life. And sometimes it can be greater depending on, who you are. But generally speaking, I think sometimes students in general that attend college aren't aware of the sacrifice it takes to get through, to perform well, to network, to get a job, to intern, what would you say are kind of some of the key things that students should think about when thinking about sacrifices they have to make and preparing themselves mentally going into, this process?
The first thing I definitely think about, especially if you go far away, is just understanding the time away from your family. That's a tough one sometimes. I live 3,000 miles away, so I couldn't always go home every spring break, Christmas, 4-day weekend. I've only went home maybe once or twice a year. And if you're somebody who's very family oriented, that can be kind of tough. In addition to that, I think also just understanding your social life is great. You're going to have a great time, but there's going to be a lot of moments where you got to fall back. And so even like Howard Homecoming, which is like, it's top notch, big event, everybody flies into town. There were some homecomings where I didn't get to do anything because I had a midterm or something due, or, there was something else that needed to be done. So sorry, guys, I know Drake's here, but I can't go, like in those moments, understanding even your dynamics at home with different friendships will shift. Just because you're growing, your friends at home are growing, your friendships kind of shift as well. So sometimes you may lose people and it's not because y'all fall out. It's just because you're on two different journeys. And at that moment in time, your friendship doesn't really fit to where it is you're in life or where they are in life. In addition, like when you're talking about networking and everything else like that, just recognizing that, in order to really get into those doors, there's going to have to be some push you have on yourself. You may have to sacrifice sleep, which is why I think undergrad is usually between the ages of 18 and 22 when you still have the energy to do it. I can't imagine doing an all-nighter today, but, in those moments, just recognizing that, there's going to be a lot you sacrifice, lots of time, lots of moments where you're up to, the sun meets you and you're still working on something. Eyes are dry, you're hungry. I remember there was a week freshman year, I think I was popcorn, raisins, and water was my dinner for like 2 days because I just had to get something done. So I could not leave my little spot. And so, that sacrifice and it's tough, but when it's over with and when it's all said and done and you accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish, it kind of builds you to be better. I always say, like, even in the 11 or 12 years I've had working at my site, I don't think I've ever had an experience as tough as some of the things I had to deal with at Howard. And because of that, stuff that happens at work is like, oh, okay, well, okay, this is how we handle that. Or, so sometimes people are running with their heads cut off and I'm like, wait, we're stressing over that? Oh, let me tell you about the time when I was 20. And because I think back to the summer before my senior year, and I was doing a summer session because I messed around a little freshman year and I had to pay for it later down the line. But there was a time period where I was in class during the summer from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It was 5 classes with 2-hour gaps in between. So, and my dorm was not on campus, so I had to just kind of stay around. So I had a 12-hour day, and then I was also working for housing. And so I had to work the night shift from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. So I literally had like 3 hours of sleep. I don't suggest that's the route you go, but just understand, depending on how your experience is, yeah, there's going to be sacrifices that you make. And there's going to be moments where you're just like, forget it. You're going to want to quit so many times, just forget it. But I think you have to kind of push and remember that there's an end result that you're fighting for.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's, like you said, certain things you don't know at 18 and you kind of have to learn in the moment, but I think you have to be open to those experiences and I guess evolving and, letting those experiences transform you. Do you think, so when thinking about all of the different ways to make money, we kind of spoke to this in your survey. What someone that says, I want to be like Calvin, I want to have, a podcast, a YouTube channel, I want to have, passive income, multiple streams of income. How do you put together a plan for all that? Do you start it like, why, how would you, steer a person that's thinking that?
I think what happens is, one, your life experiences, as they build, it just continues to open different doors. Like I didn't wake up one day and say, I want to have all these things at once. I would have never thought I would make music or different things, but it was like literally one step at a time, door after door continued to open. And I think when you invest in yourself.
COVID-19 has changed our world and transformed the way we learn, regardless of our age or educational level. Now more than ever, we have access to online education and content. That's why you'll want to partner with me, voiceover artist Kim Wilson, for your business training modules, academic institutional e-learning programs, or your at-home e-learning online educational needs. I have a wide-ranging voice which is natural, warm, and soothing, but also rich and commanding. I've had the privilege of working with over 30 companies, including Children Inc., Learning Grove, the Salvation Army, the American Bible Society, Service Employees International Union, SEIU, V-Living, the Minority Business Development Agency, and Cox Automotive, just to name a few. If you have an educationally based project, whether it's voicing online work modules, educational training software, large live events, or educational seminars requiring voiceover, I am here to help meet your specific needs. Whether you represent a nonprofit or a for-profit organization, whether you're in K through 12 or college, undergraduate, or graduate studies, I am the perfect fit for your voiceover needs. If you are an individual or a business seeking to hire for one project or multiple projects, feel free to give me a call at 404-981-1748 or send a business inquiry to kimwilsonthevoice@outlook.com. Again, that's 404-981-1748 or kimwilsonthevoice@outlook.com.
And you put in that time, you put in that, whether it's research or whether it's school or whether it's practice or whether it's training, you've put in that time. As you're going through that process, you learn other things and you meet other people and you connect and doors continue to open. And before you know it, you're doing a bunch of different things. Like sometimes I look back, I'm like, I did that. Like I could choreograph the whole show at the Kennedy-Center. I was like, are you me? Like, and that literally was just from a random experience where I had a random conversation with somebody in a coffee shop. Because I think at the moment in time, I think I had my headphones on now. And the random person's like, what are you listening to? And somehow we got in a conversation of music. And then, oh, well, I used to choreograph years ago. And before you know it, oh, well, hey, I'm doing this show at the Kennedy-Center on the Millennium Stage, blah, 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 blah. You definitely, I think, one, you have to have a strategic plan and you have to invest in that plan and you have to sacrifice time to actually adhere to that plan. The hardest thing, at least in my experience of doing something like a YouTube and the music and the podcast and everything else, is still having a career at the same time. It is very difficult to, work your full shift to do all that you have to do. And sometimes you have to take that work home and then come home to do some more work. Yeah. For people on the outside looking in, YouTube looks fun and it can be, but at least for the content that I make, it requires a lot of research and time, and you got to film it and edit and everything else. And then you got to sometimes go back and make sure you haven't said anything too crazy. And if you did, you need to be able to answer for it. And so there's so many layers. And so it's all about investing in yourself, investing in your skills and your talents, showcasing them, networking, not being afraid to collaborate, not being afraid to ask for help. One of my biggest flaws is I've always been somebody who's very self-sufficient. I will figure it all out. And I've had to teach myself to get in a space to say, it's okay, ask for help. Why, go through the extra burden of doing something extremely cumbersome if there's somebody in your corner that can help you while you go and do something else or do something in the parallel. So I think it's all about, one, investing in yourself, having a plan, sticking to that plan. And if the plan doesn't work out, okay, well, what's the plan B for the plan B? If that doesn't work out, and just recognizing that you have an end goal. And sometimes your goals will take you somewhere you never expected. The perfect example, and I'm so sorry for these long stories. But,
no, it's perfect.
There was a girl, there's a woman, Kelauni Cook, I went to undergrad with at Howard. And so she had the ambitions to do all of the film and the television. She actually used to work with Issa Rae when Issa Rae still had Awkward Black Girl. She was a producer for that. She randomly one day was in Pittsburgh and she took a coding class. I think the class was maybe $30 or $40. And she fell in love with it. And she felt that, okay, this is what I want to do. And I remember watching this journey on like Twitter and Facebook. Hey, I just took this class. Anybody want to take it with me? So on and so forth. And so she took this coding class. She got some certifications in coding. And then she discovered, there's not a lot of Black people in this field. And so she decided, I want to start my own coding company. It was called Black Tech Nation. And so she starts Black Tech Nation. 2 or 3 years later, it's a $50 million company. Because again, she got into the right space. Somebody believed in her. She knew how to sell herself. She knew how to highlight what it is that she was able to do. And from that little $27 or $30 class that she took on a whim all the way in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is very different from LA, another totally different environment. Now she's in Forbes and in Black Enterprise, and that's all in the span of just like 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years. So again, believing in yourself, and not only that, but having a plan, being strategic, knowing how to sell yourself, and going back to what we said about when you're in the right place at the right time, being prepared. She was prepared. And I'm like, dang, I should have dated her. Cause man, like, hey, big head, how you doing? I'm like, damn it.
That is funny. But sounds amazing. Like you said, that is, that sounds amazing. I think, you do look at success stories and just people, and that social media being a highlight reel is a real thing, no pun intended, but it's a real thing, and I think it is important for people to hear, like, this person that you knew, like, started out in this place, but kind of this is how her journey happened. And it's not that you have this master plan. It goes back to what you were saying in that video that I was watching last weekend, that, it's about making sure you're prepared when the opportunities arise. It's not just this, Calvin had it mapped out from birth until,
Still.
Yeah. So why not go full time? You said you're not going full time with YouTube, or you said, you guys, do you know how much I would have to do?
But I'm getting to a cusp where that could be a possibility in 1 or 2 years if I continue on the same trend. So who knows? Okay. But at the moment, I'm still in my career field, because at that same time, I've done really well in this field. Like, there's so many different accolades I've been able to hit and reach in just, a handful of years. And it's actually a lot of fun what I do. So I have a great job where, every day is different. That's what makes me enjoy what I do. You never have the same kind of day. So you're never bored. It is a lot of work. It's tiring sometimes. Sometimes you like.
Can you just share what you do, kind of how you got there, and why you enjoy it? What's the day-to-day like?
All right, so I run a community center that specializes in after school services for youth ages 5 to 18, and a few 19-year-olds that are hard-headed. But what's funny is that was not in the plan. I thought I would do undergrad. I'd move to New York and do A&R and music, artist and repertoire, do the marketing, all the fun stuff. That's what I was gonna go do. And so life happens. After undergrad, I had a father who was sick at the time. My plans didn't really align when I first got out of undergrad. So I actually moved back home right after undergrad. And so during that time period while I was home, I jumped into a bunch of things. I jumped into doing stand-up comedy, and that's pretty much how the YouTube channel became a thing. And there were all these different things that took place. But in regards to my field of work, I had done a lot of community work while I was in undergrad. And so I was like, well, maybe I should go into that field. It's just kind of like a step up until I get into something better. And so that's what I thought I would do. I land a job, and then I love it. And I'm like, okay, I don't think this is just going to be the step up job. I think I want to do this for an extended period of time. And so in that field, it was a lot of learning. I just sold myself really well in the interview. And so I literally got dropped off. I'm like, okay, what do I do now? Okay, here we go. Hey, everybody. And so it was a learning experience, but it ended up being like an amazing experience. And so I've been able to, I think I've had 600 or 700 youth pass through my doors, meaning like they're now adults or they're either in school or they're some of my oldest group or cohort, they're all turning 25 this year. So I'm like, dang, but I was a baby myself when I started because I was only like 22, 23. So, you know, seeing like that cohort and each one go into what's next. And I have one that's going to get their doctorate. I'm like, oh, okay. And you have some that go on, they decide to do the military or they decide to go into different STEM fields and everything else like that. So I've seen the payoff in that field. And so it's been a great experience, gotten an opportunity to network and meet with a lot of really great people. And, you know, as you build, you know, your acclaim, people start reaching out to you. So there's been, the White House has called before. Now it wasn't with the administration I wanted to hear from, so we declined, but, you know, different things like that. You know, the youth, they get to meet so many great celebrities and stuff. We're now in a space where there's doors that are open just from the name alone. So again, investment in time. I didn't expect to be there this long, but it's paid off because I put any energy in the time. And so now I'm kind of just living in the residuals of how great everything has been as far as the buildup and the work that went into it. And that kind of, it put me in a space where there was flexibility where I could still do all of my other stuff. And so I'm now in that space of trying to balance out both the career, professional world, and then all of my passion projects and the other things. So, you know, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and you're in DC, right? Okay. So kind of last few questions to parents who may be watching this, because you do work with children, you kind of help navigate, you know, staying involved and having experiences that you can speak to maybe when you apply to college on your resume. What would you kind of say maybe to, you know, parents who are trying to figure it out and how to kind of lead their child in the right direction so they can have the best kind of career, financial, educational success possible?
I've always said, one, be supportive, but also be realistic too. I think a lot of parents, there's a fear of letting your child go, especially if they're choosing to go somewhere far away. My parents were terrified. They were like, you know, our little sheltered son wants to go all the way to DC. Has he lost his mind? And so just understanding that your child or your teen, they're going to want to do what they want to do. So don't be the roadblock. I understand if it's a conversation around money, I fully understand, but making sure that your child feels that they have options and that you're supporting them. The minute they feel that you're not supporting, that's when everything becomes toxic. And then you fast forward to when they're 26 and 27 and they're still mad about something that happened when they were 17. And so understanding that, hey, do it as a team as far as the application process, figuring out the money, lots of communication, lots of meeting in the middle, lots of, even if you have to collaborate and get with other people. One of the things I do at my site is we do cohorts. So every year where I have a group of seniors, I do a whole family meeting with all the parents together, and we go through the application process as a cohort, because a lot of times some of the youth are applying to the same schools anyway. So let's put it on the big screen, and we're going to show you, this is what this essay is asking. This is what FAFSA is. This is what FAFSA means. And you kind of, I think it works when you have support, even as a parent. You don't want to go through that by yourself. If this is your first child that's going to school, or you haven't had the experience to go into a university system through the traditional experience, it's okay to go and get help or get somebody else in the mix, because it's a smoother process when everybody knows what they're doing. In my experience, my parents didn't really know because they didn't go to school. So we never toured Howard. And when I got to Howard, it was because I was going there to start. And so I remember me and my dad went to the wrong dorm. We never did the tour. We went to the wrong dorm. My name wasn't on the list. My dad cussed out everybody in there. You go upstairs and pick whatever room you want. I'll be up there in a minute. And we were at the wrong building. And so now we're embarrassed. I'm pulling my suitcase back to the car again. So, you know, it's okay if you're unfamiliar with what's happening. That's why it's like, ask the questions, go to the virtual events that they have, visit if you can. If you can't, just figure out the different options. You just don't want to be like a cold fish out of water and dropped off. Because I'm not going to lie, I did Howard very wrong the first year and a half, just because I didn't ask enough questions. I just was taking classes. I knew my major was political science. I just took classes that were close to political science. I didn't realize I had a whole scheme I was supposed to follow. And so that's why I ended up doing a summer session before senior year to kind of make up for classes that I did wrong. So I think with parents, just understanding that your children are just as stressed as you are. It's a scary stepping stone. It's terrifying to know that, you know, in a few weeks or months after high school graduation, you're stepping into a new world you've never been into before. So I always say learn together. And especially if you have more than one child, after you get through the first one, it's easy for the other 2 or 3. So
yeah. So the assault on public education before you get to college, no homeschool, or like you said, are we supplementing what they're learning at school, because the school systems, as you said, are not necessarily giving your child everything they need? What are we doing there?
I've always believed, well, because I'm right out of public school. I think public school works if the resources are there and the curriculums are great. The problem is usually one or the other is missing. And so with public schooling, yeah, I definitely support the idea of public schooling, but I've always said, as parents and even as a student, there's still gonna have to be more learning outside of the classroom. I think you learn a lot just from living, to be honest. But I think you have to definitely go and dig deeper as to, you know, what it is that intrigues you, and also just understanding how the world works. K through 12, pretty much, there's only a certain lane of what it is they're gonna teach you. There's only so much you're gonna get out of that. So the things that you're not getting, you have to go and find for yourself. I don't think, sadly, I feel if you only depended on K through 12 for your education, you're not educated, no disrespect. It doesn't really mean much. It just means you were able to play along with the system that was created for you. Like I always tell the students, grades are everything, but they're not everything at the same time. They just highlight the fact that there's a system that you're in and you were able to master it. And that is what you highlight as you matriculate into going into college or a job application, just recognizing that, you know, if you're, because, you know, there's a lot of people who are extremely intelligent, but they have the worst grades in the world. I always say in that kind of experience, you know, something like your grades, you still would want to have something decent that just highlight, that shows that, hey, you can still matriculate in any kind of environment, even if you don't agree with what's out there. So when it comes to education, especially for Black people, I think there's a whole lot of learning we have to do at home because the schools aren't teaching us about ourselves. We're pretty much taught that we're non-existent, minus the 20 Black history pages you get in a history book. And then you're constantly taught that everything else you've done is inferior. And, you know, all of the cultural nights and all the people we parade around usually have nothing to do with our experience. And so you're going to have to do that additional learning at home. And I think you also get that, like I said, from life experiencing. If you're in a city where they got free museums, go to the museum, just something, you know. And again, educating yourself in things that you're passionate about. If you know you want to do, I don't know, voiceovers, then in your free time, you should be kind of digging through different things that interest you in that field, or looking at YouTube tutorials on how to do your own, you know, studio equipment, everything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So last 2 questions, they're financially based. So student loans, kind of how do you feel about that? What was your experience with that? And then lastly, can you talk about the difference between a job and a career? Because I think a lot is not really known about that. I think, you know, is that a thing today? Are we doing away with kind of job versus career? What are your thoughts on student loans, and kind of what's the threshold where you're like, oh no, don't take that out? Or what's your stance on student loans and kind of how to approach college?
Yeah, so going back to the conversation where I said about like being reasonable at the same time, I think when selecting whatever institution you choose to go to for learning, I think you also have to think about financially what that means for you. If you're in a capacity where maybe you don't receive a scholarship, do you really want to take out a loan for an institution that's going to be charging you $50,000 or $60,000 a year? I had a student that got into George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, full ride, but they also got into Penn State. But Penn State was only giving them like 25% financial support. And so they wanted to go into social work. And I was like, okay, well, let's put this together. Now, social work is already a field where in undergrad, you're going to have to go back again to get a graduate degree if you want to further your career. And so do you want Penn State debt for an undergraduate degree? Or would it make more sense to do George Mason? You know, it's full ride. Depending on how well you do, you may get a full ride to Penn State for the graduate level. And then again, because even with the big name schools, a lot of times big name schools don't matter until you get to the graduate level, until you start going for the terminal degrees. Undergrad, when it's undergrad, it's pretty much as long as you're at a school that's accredited, there's going to be doors that are open. You know, with the university system, there's opportunities and spaces for networking that really only exist for university students, and that will always be there. So when you're talking money, I think recognizing, are you really trying to take $200,000 worth of debt versus had you gone to the state school and maybe you finish out with 60 or 70. And so understanding with the loans, paying attention, I support the idea of Parent Plus loans or the federal ones. I'm not a fan of going and getting the private ones because the interest rates are so high. I always say, do not go to a private bank and take out a loan.
Yes,
unless that is the last option, but also recognizing that when you get to a lot of these universities, a lot of them have programs. When I was at Howard, they had like the trustee scholarship for students that were in the School of Communication. So if you had good grades every semester, they would give you money to stay there. And so my last semester at Howard, we paid $4,300. But I also was a resident assistant, finding student work, different things that kind of can help support. So being a resident assistant, that took about a third off of the finances. Plus, because I didn't really get a lot of scholarships at Howard. And it was crazy because I was like this 4.0 student and everything. And Howard was like, welcome, it's all you get. And so, but some of that also goes back to me just not knowing what I should have done in order to qualify. And my parents maybe not being all the way in the know as well. That's why I always say it's important to ask questions. So with finances, finding your best options, utilizing websites like fastweb.com that has a lot of insight about smaller scholarships, understanding the different fellowships that exist. And again, sometimes when you get to these universities, they have programs and scholarships that exist, once you start. Or if 4-year is just too expensive and you do community, depending on where you live, I can always talk about the state of Virginia, especially Northern Virginia. They have like the Northern Virginia community, it's called NOVA, that entire community college system. When you complete the 2-year process through that, you have automatic admission into any Virginia school, or most of the Virginia schools that are public. And most of the time when you transfer in, it's a full ride. So figuring out your different options, there's always a handful of options. You just have to pick the one that's best for you. So I always say, try to be physically responsible, because even when you get out of school, you have other things you're going to want to do. You're going to want to get a house. You're going to want to get a car. You may want to go back to school 2 or 3 more times. And so you don't want to have a mountain of debt just from undergrad. If you can, sadly, for some people, it is what it is. I think it sucks that we have to pay so much for schooling, especially when you look at like the 60s and some universities tuition was $700 a semester. Like, I paid my way through school. Yeah, because the tuition was $700. So of course you paid your way through the Wendy's. But so I think that's something collectively the government has to shift. I think it sucks that people have to pay so much to go to school, and it's getting more expensive. Even where I went for undergrad, it's doubled in the 10 years that 11 years that I've been out of there. So just weighing your options and constantly searching for resources. And a lot of times, like I came into luck while I was at Howard. I came into money through different programs and fellowships, and again, working as a resident assistant. So I just found different ways that kind of helped, because we got no help. So I was getting cussed out when it was time for the loans. So,
yeah. Speaking of that, like you said, getting lucky, I think, like you said, we already talked about preparation meeting opportunity, but yeah, I think like even with going to University of Kentucky for undergrad, my dad was literally like, we were on the beginning tour, when you go and visit the university, you do like the registration. Like, can we, how can you help us out? To one of like the guys that worked in that kind of space, that office. He's like, well, maybe we can get you a $20,000 loan to cover $5,000 each year. Like you said, but just the mere asking will help you get certain stuff. So yeah, sometimes just try, like you said, just try. But anyways, so job and career, do you have thoughts on this last question?
I always say a job is what you do to get by, to make your ends meet, or meet your requirements for what it is that you need financially. I think a career is something that you actually are passionate about doing, something you're invested in, where you're just not passing through, and you're excited about what it is that you're doing. And even if you may not always like the work, and it's just as stressful as a job, but there's an end goal you're working towards. I think for a lot of us, sadly, we kind of settle into jobs just to get by. And I think a lot of it has to do with what's available to us and our different life experiences. And sometimes it's hard to get out of that box if you feel stuck financially, because this is a tough world we live in. And so I think a career is something where there's always something you're working towards. When you're at a job, you're just getting through the day. When does Saturday get here?
Right. Watching the clock, kind of.
Watching the clock. And you'll do that in a career as well. But, I think the world has been changing. And so a lot of these narratives are shifting anyway. And you see a lot of people who are going into spaces where they're doing things for themselves, if they come into the luck of being able to do that. And so I think for people, if you're going to do the whole job thing, just do the job thing while you're working towards something else. There's a lot of people who are at a job, but they're in school, or they're at a job, but they're training to do something else, or they have a job, but they've started their own business. And so sometimes the job is just helping to provide the money for a bigger investment that you're doing for something else. And so I think it varies, but there's no judgment on my end. I think people should just do what makes them happy. You know what I mean? And kind of just go in and step into the spaces that get you to where you want to be, if those spaces are afforded. And if they're not afforded, do what you got to do to get to those spaces.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much just for providing so much just great, just commentary and context to just decision making for academics career. Where can people follow you, send questions, link up with you if they want to? What are like kind of all your social media platforms and handles?
All right, so I've made this good. It's all universal. You just have to type in Calvin Michaels on anything and I'll pop up. So
Okay.
Calvin Michaels for Twitter, I should pop up, Instagram, YouTube, if you want to listen to my music, all the streaming sites. There's a Facebook page, Calvin Michaels. I am building a website that I'm supposed to launch in January. So I'm just trying to kind of streamline everything a little bit better. So yeah, so Calvin Michaels on pretty much any and everything, and I'll pop up. If you need to email me, calvinbmichaels@gmail.com for any kind of questions or inquiries or business related endeavors. And yeah, I'm pretty much, you just type me and I'll pop up somewhere.
Sure. And then LinkedIn, are you active on LinkedIn? Do you?
I am. I don't know if, I think my LinkedIn is actually under my real name. So like Michael Bruins. Yeah, I don't think it's under Calvin Michaels, but yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube.
Are you on TikTok? Because
Okay,
like
TikTok I passed on. I told myself Instagram was the last thing I was getting on. So
yeah.
TikTok I'm good on. It's just because I'll never get anything done because I'll be right on there doing so. That's it. Instagram was the last one.
Yes.
Snapchat I'm not really on either. So I'll let the kids do the TikTok. They're fun to watch though.
Yeah. Yeah. And your podcast
Oh,
should, can you?
thank you. It's called Comedically Hardheaded. Again, it's on all the streaming platforms. It's kind of story. It's pretty much storytelling. I just kind of share different experiences. So even like my unemployment experience of what that was like, or living overseas, or just different things that I've done. And so it's called Comedically Hardheaded. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, all of SoundCloud. Some of the episodes are on my YouTube channel, but I don't put them on YouTube as frequently as the other streaming services. So yeah, that's for fun. So after I've pissed you off on YouTube about whatever political thing I've said,
Right.
then you go to the podcast to forgive me.
Right. I'm always so surprised when you say there are people in the comments saying this and that. I'm like, really? Like people really have these? Or I'm like, you, why are they here? Um, Last thing, album. Where can they find your music?
Oh, same places. So again, under Calvin Michaels, I have two albums, Symphonic Euphoria and the hardcover. I'm actually working on another one that's supposed to come out, hopefully, God willing, in February. But again, on all the streaming and music sites, so Amazon Music, iTunes, Apple Music, Tidal, Spotify, Pandora,
Awesome.
pretty much everywhere you can find it on there. So,
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Okay, bye, Calvin.
all right.